Hi guys, my name's Tom. I'm with Amped Airsoft. Today we're going to be talking about SLP regulators versus non-SLP regulators and SLP tanks versus non-SLP tanks. It's a question we get a lot, so we're going to go over it a little bit in depth, and hopefully I answer all your questions here. So what I have in front of me right now is our SLP regulator that we make in-house, along with some tournament locks that I'll get into in a little bit, and then an SLP converted tank. Let's go over the job of a regulator first. A regulator, basically all it does is it takes one pressure of air, generally a higher pressure of air, and regulates it down to a desired pressure of air. Why is that important in airsoft? Why is that important in HPA in particular? Well, it's very important because most of your HPA engines are going to run at an operating pressure range, which is generally all the way down to, an extreme case is 40 psi. There's not a lot to do that, but 40 psi and all the way up to like 200 psi. Sometimes 250, but that's really pushing it for some engines. Why is that important, and why do you need a regulator to achieve that pressure? Well, because your tank actually has a regulator on the head of it as well. So your tank is holding the air, right? You have a lot of pressurized air once this tank is filled up. And then you have what is called the tank head, which is actually in itself a regulator. The tank has a cubic reading on it and a pressure reading on it. The cubic reading is the size of the tank. The pressure reading is the max pressure that the tank is rated to hold. Obviously, there's 3,000 psi and 4,500 are the two common ones that you guys are going to run into. There's 3,000 pounds of pressure in this when it's fully, when it's completely filled. It is the job of your regulator on your tank to take that 3,000 pounds of pressure and regulate it down somewhere closer to 800 in a high pressure system, 800 to 600 in a high pressure system, to where it's outputting on this end of the regulator. And in an SLP tank, what it's going to do is it's going to take it down from 3,000, 4,500, all the way down to somewhere closer to around 350 to 400 psi on this side of the tank head. The reason you have your secondary regulator, this guy, is because now this guy is going to take that 300 psi, or if you have a high pressure regulator, the 600 to 800 psi, and regulate it down to the operating range that your engine is going to want to be at. If you're running an engine at 600 psi, you're just going to blow it out. Like, you're going to blow O-rings. It's not going to work. It's not going to blow up on you. The metal will not blow up, but it's not going to work right. So again, the main difference between SLP, super low pressure, or non-SLP is going to be the tank head. That's what determines if this tank, because we refer to the thing as one thing, is a SLP or a non-SLP. Now, if you see here, we have amped converted SLP. That's because normally these HK aluminum tanks come in and they are already set up for paintball use, and they're higher regulated, higher outputting pressure on this end of the regulator. We convert them by changing around the shims and adding shims in to decrease the output pressure coming out of here to put it into that super low pressure range, or that SLP range. Now let's get into the regulator side of this. So you have your regulator here, and then you also have your SLP regulator. Now there's a bunch of different kinds of regulators for airsoft, and you probably know a few of them. We're going to talk about the SLP, and we're going to touch on a few of those other ones. The SLP regulator that we make is designed to have the output pressure of the tank and the input pressure going into this regulator be closer to 350 psi, closer to that SLP range. If you try to use a tank that is above that output pressure, it will work with this regulator, but it is not designed to work with that input pressure. So it will damage this over time, and that will not really make it blow up or do anything unsafe, but it will start to creep your pressure on your gauge over time because it is degrading it over time and damaging it. So if you try to use a non-SLP tank with an SLP dedicated regulator, you will cause damage to it. It's not going to be immediate. It can be quick in some cases, but you will cause damage to it over time, and you will break your regulator. In most cases, it's not going to be some catastrophic thing, like you're going to get hurt because your regulator is damaged and now something really bad's going to happen. That normally is not the case, but you will be damaging a item that you bought, and you will not be regulating your pressure properly, and your gun is going to probably start to creep up on you during gameplay and start to shoot hotter and hotter, and you will end up hurting somebody that you're not intending to hurt. That is the main difference between an SLP regulator and a non-SLP regulator. It is about the input pressure going into the regulator, and in the same vein, the output pressure of the tank head itself. So please do not use a non-SLP tank with an SLP regulator. Now, let's talk about some other regulators. There are some high-pressure regulators, such as the Redline SFR, the Wolverine Cat 5, and the Polar Star MRS and MR. Those are three off the top of my head that I could tell you that are all capable of taking high-pressure air as their input pressure, as well as SLP pressure. Basically, they can handle both types of tank heads, so you shouldn't worry about damaging those. The one other type of regulator to go over is with the high-pressure airsoft guns themselves, so such as a Daytona or a Tippmann. They do not need or have a secondary regulator on the top of their tank head, like every other HPA gun. They have an internal regulator that you will adjust to operate the airsoft gun properly. So if you're trying to regulate that, that'll be done internally to the gun. Okay, so big question that this kind of alludes to is, why would I want a SLP only regulator if I can use non-SLP and SLP tanks in a non-SLP regulator? There's a few reasons. One of them is going to be cost. It's going to be a lot more cost effective to just buy an SLP regulator with an SLP tank. They're probably the easiest entry-level tank that you can get, lowest cost tank that you could get, lowest cost regulator that you could get. The big reason is cost, okay? The second reason is going to be strain on your regulator. So if you have a tank that's outputting at 650 or 850 PSI, and you are using a non-SLP regulator, but it can take it down to, operating pressure, that's gonna put a lot of strain on that regulator to take that much more pressure and calm it down to a very, very low pressure to then use in your HPA rifle. You want to try and avoid that as much as possible, because over time you still will have a lot of strain, which can cause damage to your regulator over time. So using an SLP tank is going to alleviate that a lot. Instead of that regulator having to work double to try and regulate 650, 800 PSI down to 40 PSI in some cases, relatively 80 PSI. That's a very big change in pressure. It's a lot easier for a regulator to regulate down from 350 PSI all the way down to 80 PSI. That's much easier for a regulator to do. So that would be another reason why you would want to go with an SLP tank instead of a non-SLP tank, is that there's a lot less strain on the regulator itself, and you probably will not need to replace it as soon. Outside of that, if you are worried about your pressure and you're at an event, there are going to be some rule sets that are going to require you, if you're running HPA only, to have some type of tournament lock. One type is going to be the SFR tournament lock. It is going to go on top of the adjustment area and then use these two little sides here to zip tie it on. This gives a very clear indicator that you have gone through chrono and that you cannot tamper with the regulator pressure post chrono. It gives a very clear indicator to any refs or staff on the field that, hey, you are running a tournament lock, you are good to go, you should be fine. We do have a larger size one for larger size regulators. This one is actually made for our regulator and a few other regulators like it, where this will go right over the top of it, and then you can zip tie it here and zip tie it here. We also, when we make our SLP regulator, drill holes in the cap so that you have another way of tournament locking your thing should you break this or not have one. So it's already built into ours. We just offer this in the case that you don't have holes drilled into something you bought not from us. Okay, guys, so I hope that answers all the questions you guys have between SLP and non-SLP tanks and SLP and non-SLP regulators. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you got any further questions, please comment down below. Please subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks. Again, I'm Tom from Inc.